Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our ritual night talk for May 18th, 2021. Tonight's topic is exotericism for living, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So I've got a couple of links here. The first art link is an article that I actually posted earlier today, talking about the process by which you can go about learning the basic daily practices of ceremonial magic, like the rituals of pentagram and hexagram, the middle pillar ritual, basic stuff like that. Primarily targeted at beginners who are just starting out and learning about these things. So take a look. It's a good thing to look at. And I think that if you are a beginner and you are interested in learning magic, I think that the approach I lay out there is basically solid. And if you follow those steps, you can get to a point where you're doing a pretty reasonable magical practice, as long as you are diligent and you are able to stick with it on a daily basis. Okay. Now, the thing about that is when you look at it, and it maybe looks a little complicated if you don't know what's going on. There's several rituals that you should learn and memorize. But really, when you get the stuff down, you could basically get through that ceremonial part of your practice in under 10 minutes. Okay. I do the stuff every day and I get through it in, under 10 minutes as far as the ceremonial piece. I also talk about meditation. I recommend, meditating about, 20 minutes a day is good. So your whole practice session can be a thing that you spend a half hour on every day. Okay. I also have included the donation link, and the donation link goes to Leaping Laughter OTO, which this video is presented under the auspices of. And, we appreciate all donations. No donation too large, no donation too small. And that helps support us in our ongoing operations here as an OTO lodge in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm Scott Stenwick. I'm your host for these events. Now, last couple of weeks, I've been talking about this idea of exotericism, okay? And what this idea is just quite simply, if you haven't seen the previous videos, go back and review them. They're available here on the channel under the live tab. And the thing about it is that this idea that magic is spooky or secret or hidden and all this kind of stuff is really detrimental to getting to the place where, as Aleister Crowley wrote back in the day, magic is for all. Okay? If everybody did magic to, whatever their ability is to do magic, right? To, make their lives a little bit better, I'm convinced that our world would be significantly improved. Okay? Because you'd have people who were focused on, working with their minds. So, everybody meditates 20 minutes a day. I think we get a better world too. That's right there. But the ceremonial pieces they engage more of the active faculties. And in some ways, I think they can lead to faster and more effective, spiritual realization and definitely practical effects than a path of just meditation, which is entirely reasonable. And if it's your will that, I'm going to be a meditator, that's great. Meditation is a foundational practice for all of the magical arts, because if you can't produce change in your consciousness, and you learn to do that by meditation, you become acquainted with your mind, you understand what the states of consciousness are, and you get this idea about how you can observe your thoughts from a more impartial perspective than you might otherwise have. All that stuff is great. And there's health benefits too. Meditation triggers this thing called the relaxation response. And that will reduce inflammation. It increases health. And generally, it calms you down and reduces stress. Okay? And you can see results in this according to neuroscience studies after doing it for like 6 weeks on a daily basis. Okay. And, many of the most effective and, most successful people, like Silicon Valley especially, are meditators. Lots of them do it. Mindfulness meditation has become this kind of fatty thing just because, oh, well, it really does increase focus and, it helps people be more productive. Although, as I mentioned, productivity isn't always the goal. And sometimes you see this thing where companies are, oh, yeah, go to our meditation seminar. And what the bosses are thinking, yeah, they spend time on the meditation seminar. People will be less stressed working, 50, 60 hours a week. That's really not what it's for. Okay, unless it's something where your will is I'm going to work those kinds of hours towards something. Though I will say I think that it's a little more reasonable on something like the entrepreneurial side, where you're putting in that work for yourself as opposed to putting in the work for somebody else. Now, Aleister Crowley absolutely hated this one point in some of the Golden Dawn documents where the founders of the original Golden Dawn were talked about on the minimum amount of work actually required to do the Golden Dawn system. Crowley thought that was terrible. Why are you talking about the minimum amount of work? People should be giving themselves entirely to the path and all this kind of stuff. And if you happen to be an independently wealthy person who does not need to hold down a job and, who basically is just free to travel all over the world, as Crowley was when he wrote that statement, okay, maybe that's true. But if we're really going to talk about a world where people just generally do magic as a matter of course, so an exoteric world, not an esoteric world where it's this hidden thing where you got to seek it out and there's all this confusion, all this ambiguity around what you do as a magician, okay? If we're going to get rid of that and have it just be a thing where just people use magic as a random, as just in the course of their day, they just, I just use magic, okay? And it's not weird, it's not hidden, it's not spooky, it's not esoteric, you can just do it, and it's just a thing. I think to a degree, like meditation and yoga are kind of almost to that point already. If somebody says, hey, I'm going to a meditation class, hey, I'm going to a yoga class, nobody really thinks anything of it. And, in fact, as far as, Crowley and this exoteric idea, one of the pieces that you can look at is in Crowley's 8 lectures on yoga. Okay, and this was early work on yoga that was published. It's one of the earlier accurate works on yoga that was published in the West. Okay, and so the thing about it is that when Crowley was running around in esoteric circles, you had theosophy was really big, and there was this whole idea of Europeans had just kind of started to discover some of the Hindu and Buddhist material and trying to integrate it and all this kind of stuff. And so there were a lot of people who were interested in yoga, but it was yoga was this thing at the time, kind of like what, grimoire magic is now. It's like if you walk into a room talking about, oh yeah, I summoned a spirit from this grimoire or something like that, in a room full of normal people who, don't, normal in the sense of non-practitioners. They're going to be like, okay, whoa, what is that? And they're either just going to think you're weird, or they're going to be or if they're intrigued, they'll be kind of intrigued, but they'll also be a little what do you mean? Summoned a spirit, kind of thing. Okay. Now, yoga was like that back in Crowley's day where, oh, you did yoga? Oh, it's mystical. And, there was this spookiness around it. And one of the things that Crowley did in the 8 lectures on yoga, he says, look, people just need to stop treating this as this spooky, Eastern, mystical thing over here and just frickin' do it. Okay? So, in a way, some of this exotericism talk is kind of like what Crowley was trying to do for yoga. Probably not, to anywhere near the same degree. I'm not as prominent a person as Crowley. I'm just, a person in a video on the internet. But the point is that demystifying this stuff is important, okay, if we want a lot of people to do it. You'll notice tonight, okay, so I'm not wearing my trademark, black shirt and my mala. I have my hair, slick back, tied back. So I look pretty normal, okay? And that's the thing. I'm kind of an ordinary looking person. I don't really care about, walking around my life, looking witchy like some people do. And to be clear, if that's how you really want to dress and that's what you want to do, you know, you have the right to dress as you will. I'm not trying to criticize that necessarily. What I do want to point out, though, is none of that is necessary to doing magic, and none of that really has anything to do with magic. Okay? I mean, I'm an IT consultant at, Fortune 500 companies. I'm the guy, I walk into your boardroom and say, all right, well, why don't you lay out, what you want me to, design, a database and supporting applications for, and then, we talk about requirements and stuff. That's my day job. Okay. That's what I do. I don't have my day job isn't selling magical supplies. It's not writing occult books. And, honestly, if I did that, I would not be nearly as well off as I am today. Okay. So, but, I was always the weird kid in school, but not so much the weird spooky kid as I was the real nerdy kid who liked science fiction and computers, and I'm still like that. I guess, my will flows in that direction since I've kind of been this way since I was a kid. Same thing with writing. I did a lot of writing when I was in school, primarily fantasy science fiction. I do that today, plus nonfiction books on subjects like Enochian magic. So the point is that, in fact, doing your will doesn't have to look strange. It doesn't have to look edgy. Personally, I've never really cared about looking edgy or attracting attention. Okay. I'm a lot more interested in, going about my day. And, for the most part, people just letting me do the things I want to do and not, interrupt my day and so forth. I mean, I can throw a spell on myself and be like, all right, I'm going to make people notice me today. I can do that if I want. But I hardly ever do. Because, it's really only important, like, okay, if I'm trying to be persuasive about something, trying to convince somebody to say, build your IT infrastructure like the right way instead of this like other way that I know doesn't work as well, those kinds of things. And so, but basically, if you ran into me on the street, okay, you notice my hair is long, but that's about the only weird marker that I have, and I just like it long. It's not, I don't know that it has anything to do with magic. Back in the day, there was talk about, my heritage is primarily Scandinavian. So in ancient Scandinavia, supposedly there's something relating long hair to magical power. I'm not sure if I've noticed that or not, but I like it long. But tie back, slick back, it looks real normal, except for the tail. Now, and part of that is about just basically wanting to be a person and wanting to live my life in a way that is effective, within the culture we live in without necessarily buying into the assumptions of the culture we live in. And that's important too. It can be entirely reasonable to, wear regular business clothes, just go about your day, don't necessarily say anything about magic unless somebody asks, but everything you do, throw a little magic there to give yourself an edge. That's what I do. I use magic for everything. If there's something that's uncertain that I want an edge on, that I want an advantage on, I'll throw some magic, or I'll do a spell ahead of time, or whatever. It's like, it really isn't a problem to use magic a lot in the course of your daily life. And using magic is not even remotely about this, witchy aesthetic. Okay. People like it. That's great. But just because somebody looks witchy doesn't mean that they even practice magic. I mean, as you will see, you go out on the internet, you see people on videos and stuff, and a lot of the popular witchcraft that you see is more like, well, here's where to get like really good eyeliner, and here's where to get good gothy clothing, and here's where to do this. And and bear in mind, I mean, I do find a number of aspects of that aesthetic, attractive on a personal level, but not really something that I necessarily want to do. I probably wear more black than a lot of other people in my office, but that's really about the main difference that you'll see. And like this dress shirt, this is a gray one, like blacks, grays, that sort of thing. I don't wear a lot of bright colors. I mean, but this is like minor stuff. There's plenty of people who don't practice magic that do exactly the same things that I do. And it's not because I've tried to conform necessarily. I am trying to fit into the environment that I'm in effectively so I can get what I want out of it. But that is a little bit different than, oh, well, I got to wear like this dress shirt because so-and-so, and then being all worried about that. It's like worrying about that is kind of pointless, in my opinion. And the other thing is that, you don't have to be this like complete, obviously outsider person to be good at magic. Okay. You could be a person who what you do is you do magical practice a half hour a day, and when you need a spell, you throw it. Okay. Bottom line, that's easy. Okay. Right. Or at least it's simple. I'm going to back off a little because actually doing 30 minutes of daily practice every day is one of those things that's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. If you haven't ever tried to do it, you'll think, oh, I could just sit down and do that, for a day. I probably watch, like a half hour of news on the TV a day or something like that. I could do magical practice like that. And like 20 minutes of it's meditation, I can just like sit and observe my thoughts, right? Well, you're going to find that there is some resistance that comes up that you do have to get past when you really sit down to do that, okay? The commitment to doing it every day is very important. And really, that is the hardest part of it, is being committed to doing it every day, okay? And not perfect. I have not done practices, every day for the last, 30 some years. I've gone through periods where, I don't do practices, sometimes for, a reasonable amount of time. Generally, I regret it later, not in the sense that I feel bad about it, but I'm like, I could have just done that, in retrospect, why didn't I? It's more like that. And, so this is the thing. If you take a look at the recommendations for daily practice and you start learning them, you're going to realize that, okay, so these rituals are the way they are. They seem like they basically, are not that hard to do. And I mean, I've known people who have been able to learn, things like lesser pentagram or lesser hexagram, have it completely memorized, working on it for, 2 weeks. It really, really helps to practice every day. Okay. And so when you're doing it every day, what's happening is that it's helping you memorize too. Okay. So you don't need a huge temple space to do magic. I mean, I have this temple space, but this is a house, I finally bought, when I was old enough and far enough along in my career that I could get a house that was big enough to have, a nice dedicated temple room. And it's a question I see all the time. Well, I live with roommates. I don't have a temple space. How do I do this? How do I do that? And this is not necessary, okay, what you see here, to being effective at magic. Magic is much more about how you work with your mind, okay? And, realistically these days, okay, I mean, I don't even think, if you live with roommates these days and you sit down and you say, all right, well, I like people to keep it down because I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes today. I don't think that's a particularly weird thing anymore that, anybody would necessarily give that, a second thought. Here, meditation, why do you do that? Like, well, it reduces stress. It reduces stress. It calms me down and it helps me manage my thoughts and emotions. And just about anybody will buy that, right? It's not like you're not saying, well, I'm attempting to build up my magical power to do, you don't talk that way to people who, haven't experienced that, because in our culture, it is true that the idea of, believing that, like magical things, especially, okay, which by the way is interesting because there are a lot more people, I think, who believe in psychic things and psychic phenomena than who believe in magic. And people, I think, are under the erroneous impression that they are really that different. Magic is just a formal system for working with psychic ability, psychic forces, and so on. Okay, but people there's this Hollywood idea of it, and oh, you're going to go and worship the devil, and you're going to sacrifice babies, or all this movie stuff that has nothing to do with real magic, and that people don't actually do. And the reason they don't actually do it is because doing it is pointless. It doesn't serve any magical function. Okay, and the few magical texts that maybe sound like it does, for example, mention, I keep coming back to this, and there's a reason. But Aleister Crowley's chapter, Magic and Theory of Practice on the Bloody Sacrifice. Okay, and if you watch the HBO documentary Paradise Lost, okay, on the West Memphis 3 case, you can see the West Memphis 3 getting convicted of murder, basically with their motive being this chapter. And Crowley would have been horrified, okay? Because what he was doing is he was writing about sacrificing children as a code for sex magic, because he found it hilarious that the censors of the time, oh yeah, you could talk about murdering babies, but if you talk about that sex stuff, we're going to censor you as obscene. And so he wrote it coded, and he telegraphs it directly to the reader, end of the chapter. Someone who does not understand the meaning of this chapter is likely to get into a lot of trouble. Yeah. Or make a lot of trouble for somebody who just happens to look weird because, oh, this murder thing is what Satanists do. And it's like, what? Okay. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the actual occult knows that isn't true. But the point of exotericism, as a response to that, is that people think that because what do they think magic is, right? They're looking at movies. They're saying, oh, well, it's like Leviosa and Harry Potter, or it's like, the beast will rise, or whatever, in the Omen, right? They think that that's what magic is. And it really isn't. And so what they do is they take people who are magical practitioners, just glom them into that. And it's like, well, I'm a magical practitioner who, I use spells to get, better jobs, and I use spells to make aspects of my life run more smoothly. And, I use spells to help out my friends who are having problems. I mean, that's what I do. And I think that's really, and if you look at these discussions among real magical practitioners, that's the kind of stuff they do too. It's not spooky, and it's not, something that is incomprehensible, but because of this secrecy idea, because it's one of these things where there are people, oh, well, I don't share my secrets or whatever like that. There's a couple of things. So first of all, it gives new people the idea that, oh, well, the secret must be that I just have to do some little thing here, and if I found the right 10 words to say, I could just cast the spell, and if I get one word wrong, it either won't do anything or blow up in my face. Doesn't work that way at all, as probably everybody watching this video knows. But this is what is behind people asking a lot of these seemingly redundant and seemingly well, these can't you read kind of questions on social media forums. Well, is it this or this? Well, because they read two different people who say it's different. Generally speaking, what I find is that those differences between teachers, while they exist, aren't super important, okay? If you take one source and read it and learn the ritual out of that, you don't need to read 20 other people with different opinions about it and then try to sort out the one that works best for you. What I find often is that, if you read that stuff, then just go ahead, okay, just pick a source, I'm going to work with this. Sometimes what you're going to find is a few things from other people are going to kind of creep into the way you do the ritual, and that's fine if that's how the ritual flows with what you're doing, okay? And so this perfectionism, and I say this as a perfectionist myself. I say this as a really bad perfectionist myself, okay? You need to get away from this idea of the key to doing this is performing this ritual exactly perfectly. The key to doing the ritual when it comes to daily practice is doing the ritual. Just like what I said the other week about the story from one of my meditation teachers. Well, how do we know we're succeeding in our meditation practice? Well, are you doing your meditation practice? Then you're succeeding at your meditation practice. Okay, and I talked a lot more about that. Well, my mind wanders, so I can't meditate, and that's just not true. It's like, well, every time you remind yourself, just bring it back to the breath. And they have found in studies that, it doesn't really matter how many times your mind wanders, just as long as you maintain focus. And that seems to confer at least the physiological benefits of meditation. Okay. And it's straightforward, it's simple, it's not easy necessarily because, because there is resistance to some of this stuff. And I'm not necessarily sure where all of that comes from. But I mean, I think some of it is that to really do any of these practices, magic, meditation, and so forth, you have to maintain what psychologists call active frame cognition. Okay. So even in meditation, when you're observing your thoughts, okay, you're not just passively watching what they're doing, right? You are maintaining a focus on something. Usually you're breathing, so you're focusing on breath, and you're observing your thoughts as you do that. And what you're watching for is, all right, my mind just kind of drifted off over to here, and you're like, okay, that just drifted. Pull it back to the breath. Okay, and that's what it. But so that seemingly simple thing, okay, does involve some cognitive effort of the sort that a lot of us don't necessarily engage going through much of our day. It's the kind of thing, okay, well, we engage it when we have like a hard problem that we have to solve. Or, we engage it when there's this stressful situation that we have to manage and mediate. Okay. But otherwise, we do a lot of coasting. And I think that's for people who talk about this idea of people, not really having free will comes from. Okay. And I think it's kind of a silly debate in the sense of, well, obviously we have the ability to change our minds, but I think the point it makes is that, we often don't. We often don't shift our consciousness around going through our day. It's not something we really pay attention to. And that's the advantage of meditation is meditation, you're saying, all right, for this 20 minutes, that's what I'm going to pay attention to. And I'm going to rein in these wayward thoughts. Okay. And, again, this is not a thing where it's like, oh, it's about forcing your thoughts to stop. I will force my thoughts to stop and think nothing, treating like that any wandering is like some great failure. There's a lot of people who think that's what meditation is, and it's not. Okay. Or, you could meditate that way, but it's not very effective, as neuroscientists have found researching meditation. Okay. So that's really that. So that's one of these things where, again, not about how many times your mind wanders, just that you bring back to the focus, back to the focus, back to the focus for the whole practice session. Same with lesser ritual, the pentagram, lesser ritual, the hexagram, middle pillar ritual, the ceremonial work. Okay. The ceremonial work is you learn it as best you can, as fast as you can. Okay. And by learn it, I mean memorize what you're supposed to do. Because it is, it's not necessarily a problem to do a ritual from a script. You'll see that, I do rituals from scripts all the time. Okay. But you're going to find that it's much more convenient to have those rituals memorized. And with the way that I teach practical work as just a natural segue from the daily work. Okay. And so how I do that is you get your pentagram ritual, your hexagram ritual, your middle pillar, and then, okay, meditate, and then close your practice. Okay. And I outline that in the blog article that I have linked there. Okay. That meditation step can be mindfulness. It can also be any other kind of devotional meditation you want to do. It could even be something like, Liber Samekh, if you're specifically working on HGA stuff. So go through this step, go all the way through this, and then you do your Liber Samekh, which is going to take you longer than a half-hour. Liber Samekh is a substantial operation, and that does take some time set aside to do it. But the thing about it is every practical operation can just be shoved into that spot where meditation is in the list. So the example I give in the article, let's say, okay, I'm sick and I want to do a spell to get better fast. So what I'm going to do is, okay, well, I want to call the spirits of Mercury. Okay. So, all right, I do my opening up through the middle pillar, which is exactly the same thing I do every day. Don't need a script for it. It's completely basic. Okay. Then you're going to use the greater ritual, the hexagram for Mercury. You do have to learn those. Greater rituals of the hexagram, greater ritual of the pentagram for practical operations. But then once you've done that, okay, so you've opened your field, you opened your field, you've identified with the divine, you've tuned your field with the greater ritual, the hexagram. Now you're going to conjure something into your tuned field. Spirits of Mercury, I conjure you by, the God name, that you used in your greater ritual, the hexagram. When you sense the spirit is present, you deliver your charge, you do your license to depart. Just like every other grimoire operation, all that stuff can be written out. If you're starting out, I actually think it's a good idea to write up charges ahead of time. And you want an injunction, this is what I want you to do. And you want a limitation, this is what I don't want you to do. So you say, I charge you to state your injunction without stating your limitation. And that's just a matter of managing your probabilities, because you know what, because that is actually one of the biggest issues that I see where people talk about, oh, I did the magic, but it backfired. It's like, did it? Or did it do what you asked it to do, but in a way that you didn't want? And that's what the limitation is for. And, the basic one, you go back to, it's like, you have life insurance on some family member for, $100,000. And I guess, well, okay, I need $100,000. Well, that's the path of probability. That person could be in an accident or something, especially, if they maybe have a risky hobby or something like that. That would be an easy way for the magic to flow. It would be, oh, well, make one of these accidents, which is not necessarily that unlikely if you're doing something kind of risky, happen, is going to be easier than, conjuring $100,000 from some other less likely source. But you want to put it in the limitation. So, bring me $100,000 with, out causing, injury to, my loved ones or damage to my property. Homeowners insurance is another place where money could come from. And there's some stories out on the internet about people who've run into issues with that. And the key thing to understand about that, and I think the key exoteric thing to understand about that in your life, is that making a small mistake in one of these basic rituals is not going to hurt anything. The point is, back to the practice. Just like, meditation, back to the breath, right? Back to the practice. Okay, just strive to do it better next time. I mean, you want to be careful if you're starting to build up bad habits, like if you're starting to do a ritual and you have it memorized incorrectly all the time or whatnot. But it's not a case where, oh, something with tentacles is going to jump out of the air if I say the words a little wrong or something like that. And so many of the questions that I get from beginners are about that. Well, do I pronounce it like this or like this? I'm like, I don't think it matters. Well, how about this? I don't think that matters either. There's a couple of points that I'll make where I thought, okay, this actually makes a difference, even though maybe it seems like it shouldn't, but there aren't a lot of those. And the other thing is, generally speaking, if you do a ritual and you do it wrong, as in, in an ineffective way, it's just ineffective. Anything, okay? Practical magic is not the easiest discipline in the world. You're trying to use consciousness to, push something pretty heavy. So it's kind of like, okay, I've got a fan and I got this heavy thing and I want to move it. I'm going to blow this fan on it. Okay, it's kind of like that. If you have a big enough fan, you can push it a little bit. You see really strong wind can move stuff around. But it takes a lot of power on that fan to really get significant movement. And for beginning magicians starting out on practical work, that's often a lot what it's like. It's like you're trying to use a fan to push something that has some weight, and so it pushes back. Okay, I think that's why people love this idea of, oh, well, what if the world is a simulation? Or, oh, well, physical reality is an illusion and stuff like that. Basically, because I think the unspoken implication is that, well, if that's really true, then you just have to find the right way to mobilize your thoughts, and it won't push back because it's not really there. And you know what? That is a ridiculous way to do magic, because it just isn't true. If the physical world were truly illusionary, why would it push back? If it's a simulation in a computer, right? Well, so what? If the laws of physics are simulated or whatnot, why wouldn't the computer do it? And anyway, yeah, the simulation thing, that's the Bostrom fallacy, and that's just like, and it's silly because you can't really conclude anything from it, and yet it got all this attention because it's based on some stuff with probability that I could talk about at another time. But any mathematician who understands probability should realize that Bostrom argument is just nonsense. And or you can't really determine anything from it. So, I mean, there's no reason to have an opinion one way or the other. Treat the physical world as though it's just here, okay? But we do want to acknowledge that consciousness has the ability to affect things in the world, especially like ephemeral things, like situations that involve a lot of relationships, things like many natural processes over time that are governed by mathematical structures like chaos theory. Which, by the way, that was the original root of why chaos magic is called chaos magic, is because of chaos theory. It's the idea of you can put a small push into a complex system, then it propagates through the system, produces a big change. It's not, chaos magic isn't called chaos magic because yay anarchy. That's like not it. But I have run across people who seem to treat it that way. So it's like, yeah, it's not, and so one of the things that's interesting, by the way, about chaos magic and exotericism is that, so chaos magic does come off as exoteric, right? It was really the first system of magic to come out and say, hey, we're going to treat magic as this, expanding technology that, we're going to experimentally test it and we're going to look at what works. Okay, that's great. That's my whole perspective on magic, in the thelemic system as well. Chaos magic did borrow a number of ideas, and not necessarily borrow, but there are many things in chaos magic that are similar to other things in thelema. And I believe, now, I'm not going to necessarily say that I know where this quote is from, but I believe I do remember reading something about how it was either Pete Carroll or Phil Hine or one of the early chaos guys who said something to the effect of that basically chaos magic is kind of like thelema, but we took out kind of all the religious stuff, like related to gods and all that. Also throwing out spirits, that I think is not as good. But the chaos methods are perfectly fine for dealing with your own psychic power. I mean, and that's really what they're doing. When you make a sigil, you concentrate on the sigil and you cultivate the right state of consciousness, the gnosis state of consciousness, which is not hyperventilating. I just got to throw that out there too. I came across a gas magician once who insisted that when you hyperventilated and got dizzy, that was gnosis. It's not. Gnosis is a specific state of consciousness where it is an alteration. But there's also kind of this element of awe associated with gnosis. I think probably the closest thing that an ordinary person who's never practiced magic is going to get to with that is, go for a long walk in nature where the scenery is particularly beautiful, and just take it all in. And okay, so not only is being out in nature, that's been found physiologically to be good for people, just like meditation, it does cultivate this state of, wow, this is the world around me. Go up north and go out and do astronomy. Okay, you're up north where there's no light. You look, just the vastness of the universe. You got the northern lights coming in and stuff like that. I had a ton of astronomy when I was a kid, including like going to astronomy camp, which was up in northern Minnesota. Okay, and it's amazing. Okay, if you don't feel that feeling that you get when you're looking at this kind of expansive wow, and it kind of makes you tingle, that's gnosis. And if you cultivate that, your chaos magic is going to be way better than if you make sigils by hyperventilating. So the thing about that, so that's a little bit of an aside. But one of the things, though, that chaos magic kind of wound up being, which is interesting, is instead of, okay, well, we're going to try to kind of make magic exoteric, but it also had this chaos anarchy kind of connotation. And it's like, well, so, if you're not like kind of punk, why would you do this sort of idea? And so it's like, a lot of the people who wound up in it seem to, be people who were particularly drawn to that kind of punk anarchy kind of aesthetic. Okay, and it is true that it's not nearly as structured as like order magic and stuff like that. And there's this kind of antinomian idea about not giving too much credence to the things around you. And my feeling is, okay, I give credence to the things around me in that I acknowledge they exist, not necessarily that I like them or am drawn to them, but I also use them to get what I want. Okay, and this is an important distinction. It's like, I don't walk around in business casual clothes because, oh, I really feel like I should do that. I shouldn't wear anything weird. It's not that. It's that I wear business casual clothes going into a situation like a job situation where business casual clothes are the best thing to wear to get what I want. It's all about doing your will and being mindful about it. You want to be cognizant of what you're doing. Don't do things on automatic. Understand that there's a reason. Or if you decide, I'm going to do this on automatic, deliberately set that. So that it becomes a habit. And well, then you're using your conditioning system to help you, right? So, you want your conditioning to support your practice. And that's another thing about regularity in practice. If you get to the point where, your daily magical practice is a habit, you're going to start feeling weird if you're like tired and don't do it. So I'll just get up and like do whatever. That's good, actually. That is taking your conditioning system, which I've talked about. Bad conditioning is the source of a lot of problems that people have in life. You're conditioned a certain way as a child, and then you're older, and now this conditioning that worked for you as a child, right? It got you rewarded. Now, when you do it as an adult, all of a sudden, well, it doesn't get you rewarded. What's going on? Okay, and I'm convinced, again, not trying to characterize another tradition, I suspect that this idea of conditioning that becomes out of date as the world changes is very similar to the Buddhist idea of aggregates that impede your happiness because of the impermanence of the universe. I think I think those are pretty close. And basically it all just starts with, okay, here's what you're conditioned for, growing up, because the conditioning system is simple and stupid, and it repeats stuff. But as a magician, you can look at things like, you can learn correspondences. You can learn, what things are associated with what. You can learn the kind of spells that you would do with this or that thing. And what you're doing there is you're kind of encoding this into your conditioning system so that, like, okay, I see something red. Okay, something red, I immediately think of, Mars or Aries, right? Because planet Mars and Aries, red, are the color associated with that. Okay, similar to like blue and purple for Jupiter, yellow and orange for Mercury, that type of thing. Okay, and so what it does is, if you've got this kind of built into your habit energy of how you want to do this stuff, these associations will just pop up naturally around you, and you'll be able to link them together. And then also in a ritual space, you can put a whole bunch of them together, and then all the conditioning loops that are getting fired at your brain while you're doing your ritual are related to these correspondences that you've internalized. And that's cool. Okay, you've shifted your conditioning around, so it's doing something good for you. It's getting you to do daily practice, and it's keeping your mind focused, and mental focus is important in successful magical operations. So this is probably a topic that deserves a little more discussion. I will come back to it in another one of these talks. I think I'm going to wrap up here. I'm coming up on 45 minutes. And let me just restate, if you are a beginner and you're interested in learning the daily practice, take a look at the article I have linked to on my blog at onale.blogspot.com. Till tomorrow, it's going to be the top link on the blog, and then tomorrow I'll be posting the link to this video. And keep in mind, if you appreciate this series, would like it to continue, would like to support our work of Leaping Laughter OTO, the donation link is in the description. Please consider making a donation to help support the operations of Ordo Templi Orientis in the Twin Cities. With that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a great rest of the evening. Love is the law, love under will.